Welcome everyone to the third webinar of the VAST project. This is a series of 8 webinars. Today we are happy to host one of our partners, Festival of Athens Epidaurus Festival partner, and Dr. Aristotelis Nikolaidis. We will give a talk about communicating values through ancient drama, and especially the case of Sophocles Antigone. And the floor is yours, Mr. Nikolaidis.
Thank you very much, Elena. I'm delighted to be here. And let me first of all start with screen sharing. So today we will be talking about communicating values through ancient drama in the case of Sophocles Antigone. And of course, this is the case study that we researched in the context of the performance of Antigone at the Athens Epidaurus Festival. Now, there have been a number of presentations in various international conferences so far, and actually a couple of weeks here at NKUA's event. If this particular presentation is designed in a way that will, of course, cover all relevant aspects of that research and its relation, of course, to vast research objectives, which is values. But I've taken care to ensure that this is a little bit more accessible to people who haven't seen the performance. So I will speak a little bit more about the performance and a little bit less about theory and research. So let's forget, however, just for a couple of minutes, let's forget about ancient drama and go all the way to London. This is the building where the Museum of London is situated. It used to be a warehouse where sugar was kept, and this in front of the building there's a dock, and that's where the ships left. Private ships by private companies. They traveled all the way to Northwest Africa, and they carried their human cargo. Slaves was the product that they carried all the way to the West Indies, and slaves there in the sugar plantations produced this very profitable commodity at that time, sugar. And that was what the same ships carried all the way back to London and to this particular warehouse. So for about a couple of centuries, more than 3,000 ships, more than 1 million people enslaved in an extremely horrifying, at the same time profitable enterprise. The museum is actually arguing in a very eloquent fashion about the ways in which this trade produced wealth that was used to lay the foundations, as it says, for imperial dominion. And also, this is where the roots of racism lay, contemporary forms of racism, biological or cultural. It's a very small, segment of much darker aspects of European culture. And of course, we may find even darker ones in the history of colonialism, as well as in the world wars in the 20th century and the rise of Nazism. So one of the important things when we're talking about values is to understand the political liabilities that are involved in such project. I will simply restrict myself to Delanty's work, not only because it's core in the field of critical heritage studies, but also because he's extremely good at summarizing things. So one of the things he does here is to map out the field. So the idea here is that criticism has prevailed during the last half century. This idea of Western civilization as being singular, as being universalistic, as being written with a capital C, as he says, has been largely abandoned. And of course, its ontological assumptions have been reconsidered. And part of these ontological assumptions is that values is, supposedly what civilizations are based on. And clearly, there are two major trends in that criticism. One that comes from the left and has seen, this is an oversimplification, but still has seen these ideas of civilization as a form of legitimating colonialism. Postmodernism, or if you prefer, post-structuralism, has deconstructed the philosophical foundations of such ideas. And of course, post-colonial thought is the most important angle in this field. Overall, the actual concept of civilization has retreated, and culture is the term and the concept that has come to the forefront. And hence, we often talk about the cultural term. Now, what all these things mean is that the so-called grand narratives of old have been abandoned. It's the historical variability of Europe that is now the subject of interest across time and place, of course. Clearly, these grand narratives have ceased to be accepted as self-defining foundations of Europe. There is considerable skepticism about a supposedly objective interpretation of a European order of values as a foundation for the construction of political communities, such as contemporary forms like the European Union. Now, none of that, however, means that European culture does not exist or that it doesn't matter. Cultural heritage, as Delanty argues very elegantly, has some validity. To accept that, however, does not mean that we attribute universal validity to it. The interesting thing here is how to retrieve normative content from a point within European heritage. And what I find extremely useful, and I think I'm not the only one, is his argument that there may be conflicting elements in our common cultural heritage, and that includes, of course, universalistic ideas. But the focus is on their mediation. They're always mediated through the particularity of culture and located in specific time and space. So perhaps one way of addressing the mediation of such elements would be a theater performance of ancient drama, such as Antigone by Sophocles. These are two shots of the stage. As you can very easily see, this is an adaptation, a contemporary adaptation, where action takes place mostly in a television studio. This is the performance that was commissioned for VAST and took place last summer. Now, in terms of thinking about research design, the idea here was to propose on stage Antigone so as to implement VAST's research objectives. On the one hand, it's the play's connection to the project's focus on 7 core values for the formation of European culture. freedom, democracy, equality, tolerance, dialogue, human dignity, rule of law. We'll meet them, all these values, in the course of this presentation. But then again, it's not just the play, it's also the performance itself and its connection as a contemporary adaptation with the project's research focus on the present of values. I'm not going to go through any detail into the research questions because they were organized in 3 sets, which were particularized when we were researching either the artists or the audience. But as a general formation, the structure was to talk about the representation of values and how these are represented, in other words, how our values are presented in the context of the critique of power. So there were here elements relating to a discursive, visual, and performative representation. In short, we analyze the performance. Secondly, the question is about the perception and the communication of the values by the theater artists, what in the context of us we call value communicators. And then again, there were also questions relating to how values are perceived and then redefined by audiences, what we in VAST call address as value recipients. Clearly here, and you will also see this in a little bit, audiences are not perceived as passive, but as active co-creators of meaning. Now, in terms of theory, there were basically 4 trends. The most important one, of course, was to address what we've already touched upon with the Landis help, and that is to endorse the critical and interdisciplinary standard in the humanities after the cultural turn. This is to say, cultural studies, especially core cultural theory, theory of representation, and of course audience studies. But at the same time, we incorporated contemporary critical heritage studies, as well as the critical readings of democracy and the media, stemming from contemporary media and communication studies, and then, of course, interdisciplinary scholarship on Antigone and the relationship between democracy and ancient drama in theater studies. In terms of methodology, we followed a mixed methods approach. In terms of addressing value communicators, we mostly used qualitative methods, namely semi-structured interviews. Again, we specified the questions. We held 8 semi-structured interviews with theater artists that covered all aspects of the performance, a conceptual approach, of course, the director and the dramaturgist. We're going to talk a little bit more about them today. But also the set lighting designer, the costume designer in terms of the visual implementation, and the performative interpretation. For that, we interviewed 4 actors on the key 4 roles. We also, of course, research value recipients, and here we combine qualitative and quantitative methods. We had an audience questionnaire as well and held 2 focus groups. The first one was with audience members. The second one was with audience members and the director. So we combined value communicators and value recipients. The quantitative audience study was structured on the basis of 33 variables. We looked at the demographics, the perception of values, as well as the adaptation of ancient dramas. And then we used a printed questionnaire as well as a QR code. Sampling was random, and with the help of very capable ushers and their head, Sonia Mirido. I always feel the obligation to help Sonia Mirido because she was instrumental in terms of achieving this more than 50% degree of representation. We had 176 questionnaires completed. That was our sample out of a total of 1168 spectators, which was our population. I'm not going to go into multivariate analysis in any detail because we haven't got any time, but just to be absolutely clear, the variables of age and relationship to theater, especially professional or educational, proved to be particularly important. Now, let's go to the performance itself. And this version of Antigone is about is largely politics under exceptional circumstances. Creon becomes a prime minister, a contemporary prime minister that an image we're familiar with from the news in more or less all Western democracies, parliamentary democracies. He becomes prime minister following civil war and the pandemic. So he comes into power in a moment of crisis. And one of the most interesting features of this performance is the shredding of the separation of the states. So classic liberalism here goes out of the window. The three major estates, legislative, executive, and judicial. In other words, the parliament, the government, and the courts, they're united into one, as well as the media, which is the fourth estate. All powers are concentrated in the hands of the prime minister. The images you see are from a video that is projected at the very beginning of the performance. And in effect, the government is televised. Political and media power is fused together. The prime minister is head of a very small government, an executive council, if you like, and the anchor woman of this television station is also the government spokeswoman. Now, there are clear points of departure, and they're quite important in relation to the original, let's say, version. The first concerns Tiresias, who is redefined and plays a pivotal role. Tiresias here is the representative of, let's say, financial forces rather than the gods. And in fact, when Creon collapses, takes over the government. And the second point of departure is that in the end of the performance, Creon is reinstated. Yes, he collapses pretty much as in the original text, but he is restored and returns. We sort of return as if making a full circle to the very beginning where he assumes power. Now, these forms of representation constitute a political critique of contemporary parliamentary, liberal capitalist democracy, and through the adaptation of ancient drama. One thing that is important, and I'd like you to keep at the back of your heads while I will go on, and we'll get back to this in the end, is that we don't necessarily have to agree with everything. For instance, since I have my background is in cultural studies and communications, I think there is a extremely fluent and developed critique of the media's problematic relation to democracy, the way the fourth estate has not actually been implemented because of market forces. So there's, a very long, many decades of research and scholarship that fall into this. So in this respect, I would disagree, with many elements of this representation. For instance, market forces are not actually visualized. We don't see, for instance, advertising. I think it is more market forces that limit and undermine the media's contribution to democracy, their informational role, the public watchdog role, rather than problematic forces that lie in the dark, pretty much as Tiresias or what whatever economic forces he represents. But none of that is really important in the context of this performance, in the sense that what we're talking about is the communication of values. And in this respect, what is of interest here, if we have a space opened in order to mediate such elements of European culture, the value of democracy, for instance, in a way that allows artists and audiences to engage in critical dialogue. And I think in this respect, whatever disagreements one may have, the performance is quite successful, as you will see. Now, before we go on, I'll just very briefly introduce two concepts. We're not going to go into adaptation theory today. This is part of another presentation, but it's important to understand that since that the vehicle here is adaptation, and adaptation is both a process and a product. It's a shared discourse, according to Hutton, and it takes place, of course, in a particular time and space. And Hutton gives us, if you like, a few tools that can be very helpful. The adapter's voice is a concept that refers to decisions that are made in a creative as well as an interpretive context. Now, what, in other words, the artists do is simultaneously ideological, social, political, historical, cultural, as much as it is personal, aesthetic, or artistic. On the other hand, Hutton introduces the concept of the knowing audience, and this is the audience that is familiar with the text, with the original text. In other words, has seen Antigone before, but also, and this is what is of particular interest here today, familiar with the context of interpretation, again, in cultural, political, intellectual, or aesthetic terms. Now, let's see how this plays out. This is an example of examples, a few excerpts from the semi-structured interview with the director. What I really found interesting in this interview is that he comes across as understanding adaptation as updating, but in effect, it's a way of transcending time. So he understands and acknowledges democracy as a value in the play. He connects this to the concept of the citizen limits of power. In other words, to the political critique that we were talking about. But the interesting thing, when he talks about what changes when the original text is transferred in a contemporary context, is that his idea is about translation. So the goal would be to translate power relations from what they used to be to what they are today. And also this style of translation, if you like, involves scenic elements and very, material aspects of the performance, such as, the concept of public space. Again, the public space, the square, he says, in front of the palace, is now translated into the contemporary public space, which he understands as television. If we turn to the dramaturgist, there's a very similar process, a very similar understanding of adaptation as an analogy, which in effect, however, transcends space. So he talks about, all politics, power relations, corruption, the deep state, and so on and so forth. This is in the context of my question to him about the representation of crayon. That's why he talks about puppets in the hand of the state. Now, regardless of what you think about this, the interesting thing is he understands this as something, as a form of representation that can work out well, as he says, in Greece, but also in Israel, in Turkey, in the US, in the UK, in France, and so on and so forth. So he's talking about an analogy here. Time and space, needless to say, are components of, the vast acronym. Now, if we now turn to the audience, I'll give you some examples from the first focus group we held. When I asked them to assess and describe and assess what is it that they've seen in this performance, this particular performance, and how our politics and power are represented. One of the spectators told me very simply, it is what is happening every day, what we see happening every day. So I asked them, so what is it that you see happening every day? And I asked them to make a list, dictate to me what are the subjects that are addressed in the performance according to their view. And the first thing they said is concentration of power. In other words, the shredding of the separation of the states, the need for change in social and political terms. More specifically, the handling of the pandemic, the handling of public opinion through television, censorship, propaganda. And then one of them, a little bit later on, came back to this list and he said, I'd like to add the phony. And by the phony, he meant the difference between reality and its representation in the media. So when I asked him to explain what he means by the phony, he talked about the difference between what was going on stage and what was being broadcasted on the screens. In other words, the representation of the representation, the story within the story. And he talked about a stark opposition. People were behind the cameras, people were in distress, there were negative things happening, but on the screens, a perfect image was displayed. And he actually gave credit to this performance for making him more sensitive, more aware of the dangers of simply accepting what he sees on television or what he hears through the media and not processing it, not thinking critically about it. So far, it seems that there is a correlation between the way democracy as a value is perceived and is communicated in the form of a critique through an adaptation of ancient drama, and it's being perceived as such, as a critique. But most importantly, these members of the audience are bringing up their own issues and their own understandings of the value of democracy as a critique. Perhaps most important of all, I was really surprised that this actually came up so easily. Usually you have to dig during a focus group much harder than I did in this one, because I didn't need to. These people were, the knowing audience, in the sense that they were fully aware of the interpretive context here. In other words, the communication of the value of democracy in the form of a political critique. So another spectator told me this. She refers here to a moment towards the end of the performance where the cameras are turned to the audience and the audience sees their faces on the television screens. And the way this spectator understands this artistic, if you like, practice is as an invitation to go on stage as well, as a call to participate and to participate in decision making in any way we can, as she says. In this particular case, the audience is signified as a political body simply by turning the cameras towards them, but is also interpreted interprets itself as a political body through its image projected on the screens. Now, let's look at the big picture. And the big picture came through this quantitative audience study that we held. I'll show you just a few of the results. We were very much interested in the audience's understanding of the political role of ancient dramas. We had two questions. This is the first one, the easiest one, if you like. The historical original purpose of ancient drama in ancient Athens. citizen involvement in the public affairs of their city. Pretty much what this spectator talks about here. This awareness is expressed to an incredible majority. In other words, more or less what you've heard so far through the focus group, we can find confirmation of this in the big picture that the quantitative data can gives us access to. So if we look at the positive replies, the agreement, agree and absolutely agree, both of them together is this incredible 94.2% of the audience agrees with that. But they also agreed with the contemporary assessment. In other words, the question here was that nowadays ancient drama performances may contribute to contemporary spectator citizens in terms of pointing out and cultivating values. And here, the agreement on both of these Likert scales, agree and absolutely agree, amounts to 85.7. So this is an audience that clearly understands what the political role of ancient drama is. It also has a very positive view of adaptation. And I'm not going to show you all the questions, but let's look at the first one. The evaluation of performances which adapt the original drama text so as to become more accessible to contemporary audience. This is a 77.8% a majority of positively and very positively of people positively and very positively judging such forms of adaptation. Now, this type of majorities do not, however, represent values. We asked the very same audience to assess the degree of strength of the 7 values. The literal question was, as citizens, how do you rate, not as spectators, as citizens, how do you rate the degree of strength of the following 7 values in contemporary society? Now, freedom and democracy, perhaps unsurprisingly, were the values most positively assessed. So the positive assessments, large and very large in terms of the degree of strength, combined, they reached 63.7 and 63.1 respectively. These majorities, however, start to dwindle. Dialogue falls to 58.1, then almost 10 points below that, human dignity is at 54.2. Tolerance and rule of law are marginally above and below the 50% mark. And the same image emerges through the assessment of the negative responses. Now, I'd like to explain this and talk a little bit more about the significations, the political significations, division and polarization through the graph. So if we look at this graph in a critical fashion, we could say that there is a clear majority of positive assessment of values in contemporary society, of their degree of strength. This majority ranges from 48.8 in the case of tolerance, all the way up to 63.7 in the case of freedom. However, there is also a solid minority which has negative assessments. In other words, they think that these values are, their degree of strength is very weak or weak. And this ranges from 22% in the case of democracy, all the way up to 36.1 in the case of the rule of law. That is to say, more than 1/5 to more than 1/3 of these people as citizens, they think that democracy is not as strong, and similarly, rule of law. The element of polarization may be accessed through the so-called neutral responses. In other words, that segment of the audience that didn't take a position, either for or against. It's particularly low. It ranges from 11.4 in the case of dialogue and rises only up to 18.1% in the case of tolerance. Now, let's go back to the Delaunty. One of the things that I find interesting again about the Delaunty is the acknowledgement through a critical lens, of course, on European culture, the acknowledgement of significant aspects that are important for the present: the constitutional democratic state, human rights, integrity of the human person, which is, very similar to what we address in VAST as dignity, civil society, and so on. In his view, the learning process, as a learning process, history contains a possibility for societies to transcend the given and the inherited. In other words, not to subscribe to the conventional idea, not to, if you like, congratulate each other and admire each other for the significance of the values that we share, as opposed to other values of other cultures, which are considered by implication inferior. This possibility seems to exist. It seems to be possible to communicate values through ancient drama in a critical fashion. Or if you prefer, if we look at the case of Antigone, we may be able to confirm what the Delaunty is talking about, the possibility of a critical reading of the European heritage in the present. That, of course, would also involve and require a critical understanding of the conceptual and political problems we talked about in the beginning. In other words, the essentialist and universalist account of values. And also a shift away from ontological accounts of values to their communication. In other words, that what the context, the primary realm where their meaning is produced, is communication, rather than as opposed to an understanding of a fixed meaning that transcends time and space. However, understanding that such forms of communication of values through ancient drama requires us to assess the culturally specific means, speeches, and practices that both artists and spectators contribute, such as the ones we came across through the interviews and the focus groups, but also through the content analysis of the performance and the quantitative data. What is important here is the culturally specific element. In other words, these are parts of a discursive field that takes place in a specific given space and time. And that's why I said when we were talking about the performance that this is irrespective of contradictions or limitations. I may, for example, think that market forces are being mystified and not fully agree with a particular critique that the performance represents. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that the performance opens up a space for a critical assessment of the value for democracy, for instance, in the present through ancient drama. We don't all have to agree, otherwise we wouldn't need dialogue. We do, however, need a realm that can offer us a form of critical understanding. And that the key feature in that realm is the role of the audience, what in VAST address as final co-authors of meaning. The concomitant importance here is that of critical thinking and dialogue, the one that the audience is engaged with, in other words, between them primarily. This critical thinking and dialogue are resilient features of ancient drama, but we may also think of them as potentially signposting themselves as normative features of European culture from within. In other words, we may be able, under terms and conditions, to think critically of European culture and its values from within, from positions within that culture, providing, of course, we are, if you like, armed with critical concepts and arguments. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nikolaidis. If anyone would like to ask questions, your microphones are open, and please feel free to ask anything you would like. Okay, I think we don't have any questions. A lot of
I have one.
Oh, that's good.
I have one. Not for myself. I'm not going to ask questions and answer questions. I'd like to ask how many of you have seen this performance?
I see hands being lifted and raised.
Right.
1, 2, 3,
4,
4, 5, 6.
Great. Okay, so what I would like to ask you, without wanting to treat you as members of the audience, if you see what I mean, and start a tiny little online research project here, we're going to start a small focus group. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, what was your understanding as members of the audience in terms of the political, the communication, let's say, of the value of democracy in the form of a political critique? I have said, and that's part, of my integrity as a researcher, I have to say this, I didn't agree with everything I saw. I would expect, if you like, an even sharper critique. What was your reply? How do you understand this treatment, let's say, of the value of democracy in the case of this performance? What was your interpretation?
Well, if I may jump in now.
Of course.
So, well, I really enjoyed, to be honest, the performance. Would I want a sharper critique? I'm not sure, because then it boils down to what you have said, sort of respecting all of the audience, and I'm sure there must have been people there that didn't like the critique. So I don't know if it was in the director's intentions to sort of keep a balance between how much critique he puts into the game, so to speak. But for me, it has been a very interesting approach and refreshing, and actually, yeah, I didn't mind at all, to be honest, all these novelty, let's say, being introduced in an ancient Greek tragedy. I understood from the follow-up discussion during the performance that some of the people don't feel very comfortable when such directions go on, but I do feel very comfortable, and I really enjoyed it.
Let me ask you in a different way. This spectator that I brought up when I started talking about the focus group, she said, when I asked, what was that performance about? What did you think you saw in it? She said, what we see every day. Would you agree with that? I mean, would you say that what you see in this performance is what you literally see? That, for example, television news distort reality?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
I agree as
say
well.
no.
Right? I
Yes.
agree as well. I agree as well. But
I will say no.
No,
okay.
really.
No.
So why no, George?
Okay, for me, my opinion is very biased.
Of course,
Because-
everyone's opinion is
Yeah,
biased.
because I really like this performance.
Hmm.
I've seen many Antigones, and actually I have, I think it's one of the best Antigones I have ever seen. For me, it's not that I accepted or, disagreed with the messages.
Hmm.
I am happy, that I could see the messages and I could see the opinion. Okay, and at that time I was seeing it. I didn't, have in my mind that I agree or I disagree. I just was there, receiving all messages, and disagreeing or agreeing is a post thing after the show.
Hmm.
And for me, the ability to see the opinion and all, even for the things that I disagree, is very good.
Yes.
But I don't agree that, I saw this what I see every day happening in my
Hmm.
real
Hmm.
world.
Hmm. Hmm.
world. Because for me, sometimes it made explicit things that I may not have thought of.
Yes, of
So
course.
for me to say that, okay, I haven't seen anything new in this, and I assume that all these are happening.
Hmm.
Okay, perhaps for some people it's true, but I'm not. It was not true for me. Okay, so I disagree with this opinion.
Hmm. I
That
think the most important thing.
I have seen, in this play, what I see every day in my, everyday life.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember, it's a while now. It's almost a year and a half. I had brought this up in one plenary when we were talking about values, and I gave the example of Trump's speech um, before the invasion of Capitol. And in that speech, among other things, Trump is talking about freedom of the media, and he's talking about, the media undermines the expression of free opinion, all these kinds of things, and the whole rally was for the defense of democracy. If you look at Trump's rhetoric that day, not only that day, but that day is very important because his followers invaded Capitol. But the interesting thing here is how all that sounds, very left wing, if you like. Like if you didn't know who was actually talking and who is actually criticizing democracy, some of us may even agree with some of these things. Of course, he's a demagogue and he's using anything he can. But I'm just trying to say that the critique of democracy, of course, like I said, that's why I brought up my let's say professional background in media and communication studies. I teach about media and democracy, and there is a very clear critical angle that most of us accept, and journalists as well, for that matter. But I think I like the performance very much. I enjoyed it just like you did. But what I find fascinating about it is the way it may spark an understanding of ourselves, first of all, as needing to talk about these things, right? Needing to talk in the sense that we actually have to articulate opinions, and the fact that Maria says that she agrees with the spectator, and you say you disagree with the spectator, is an open space, if you like, given to us by this performance. And in this respect, of course, we will agree and disagree. This is a healthy thing. This is why we need dialogue. This is why we need democracy, because if we all agree with everything, we can just as well go home. This is the actual value of democracy, the the understanding, if you see what I mean, the understanding that we all have different views, we all have different interests as well, even in material terms, but there are ways through dialogue for the majority to express itself. That's what this is about, as far as I'm concerned, and I think the performance did this extremely well. So anyone else in agreement or disagreement with the content of the performance before I ask you my second question? Okay,
We will
my
need
second-
to close it in about 5 minutes. So
yeah. My second question is very simple. It's very simple. Do you think that how shall I put this? That the dramaturgist is right when he said that, you know, this can work out very well, the performance, the form of representation, it can work out very well in Israel, in Turkey, in the US, in the UK, and all. Do you agree with that? And perhaps, you know, because George had brought this up, and Democritos has the link, perhaps we should organize a screening for the partners and see what they think, you know, about this, people in Italy or in Portugal, about such a representation. What do you think about that? Across space now, not across time.
I would say that it depends on the audience, actually. It depends on how, you know, open to alternative views already are.
Yes.
You are. I believe that, you know, if you are a person who he's leaning towards openness to change and, you know, seeing alternative viewpoints, yes, it can work in other places. Because, you know, he's the type of person that actually, you know, sees and recognizes the other, you know, alternative viewpoints and, you know, consume them and actually pass through her own filter and, you know,
Yes.
have an effect. But if you are not, you know, willing to get into this process, I think it's not going to work for you.
Yeah. We should try this, George, and find out. But I totally agree with you. And in this sense, although we didn't get into the details today like we did in the NKUA event, I mean, in terms of the aspect of adaptation studies, adaptation theory, this is what the knowing audience is. The knowing audience is attracted, you know, to this type of performance. And that's how this works. It's very important that these people are familiar with the text and the interpretive contexts as well. So I think you're absolutely right. But I think we should try this. Shall we wrap this up now, Elena? Five minutes have passed?
I believe so, yes. But if you'd like to discuss
No,
further,
it's okay. It's all right. It's fine. It's fine.
that's
I
great.
just wanted to say thank you very much for inviting me and for
Thank
giving me
you.
another opportunity to share this, and we're able to share it on the platform. And hopefully there's more to come, and we'll be in touch about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much for the presentation. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.